You know, everyone assumes that making films is a glamorous proposition, and yet so much of it is the really hard work of raising money and trying to convince people that this is a good idea, and then trying to figure out if the idea will actually work as a film. And then finally you have that moment when you're out there and you're finally filming and you're exposing the first reel of film, and it just means so much. We were at Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. It was dawn. We were suddenly there. And the thing that you'd been thinking about was no longer this abstract. It was tangible, it was real, and you were committed, and it was sort of jumping down a chute, the end of which still has not happened. And for me, that moment when you begin filming is really the moment of birth, where this is actually happening. This is a real thing.
Each of the films we do have different requirements and teach us as filmmakers different things. With Civil War, a lot of that was inhabiting photographs. With Lewis and Clark, who took their expedition before the invention of photography, it was more about becoming their eyes and experiencing the landscape the way that they would have seen it. With the war, of course, the footage from incredible both photographs, but particularly the footage that was taken of that was the raw visual material of it. This film, probably as much as anything except with possible exception of Lewis and Clark, glories in the live cinematography of the wonderful, majestic landscapes that we have saved for future generations. And therefore, the work of our cinematographers is that much more important. Ken is a great cinematographer in his own right.
From the very beginning, I took pictures. My teacher was a still photographer. That's what I was involved in. And fortunately, I've been able to work with great cinematographers like Buddy Squires and Alan Moore over the last 30+ years. But I still love the opportunity to get out and film, and some early films, like the film on the Shakers, is all my cinematography, with the exception of the interviews. What's been so satisfying about the parks is, though I haven't been out as much as I wanted to be, I've been out a lot. And as I look at scenes, as I look at episodes, as I look at the introduction, it's represented by images I've taken, and that roots me in a way, not just artistically, but in a deeply kind of personal and human way in the film. It's part of me, I'm part of it. Whatever I saw at that moment is now sort of forever in the film.
Parks have been a part of my life from the time I was a little kid, and it has a deep appeal to me to go someplace other than whatever it is that is your reality. And over the course of writing books and others, I've been to many national parks, got to know people who work in the parks, and developed this abiding affection for them. And in 1998, when I was on a trip with my family, taking them to parks, I realized that there's an American story there. Both the history of the parks, that it is an American idea, but equally important, seeing my kids experiencing parks the way that I had. I realized it's an intergenerational story. It's a story of not just a place, but passing on a memory of a place.
You know, we've struggled with coming to terms for the last 30 years with what it means to be an American. In fact, I've said that each of the films is asking the same deceptively simple question: who are we? We learn a lot about ourselves in wars. We learn a lot about ourselves and these issues of race and other things that divide us, gender. But we also learn a lot about ourselves in this magnificent continent of ours. And there's no better celebration of it than in the national parks.
When we started shooting this project in April of 2003, going on 6 years ago. The only national park I was interested in going to was Fenway Park. I had probably flown 3 times in my life. And even the first production trip I went on, I tried to get away from flying. I took the train across country from Springfield, Massachusetts to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 3 days worth of traveling when I could have just done it in 3 hours probably on a plane. But eventually, once Dayton and Ken got onto were going to be in places with me, there was no way I could pull that off anymore. So I had to get into the planes.
Well, I'm lucky as being both the writer and the producer of the films that I do with Ken. My job was to go out to the most wonderful landscapes on Earth with a talented film crew and be up at dawn or stay up until sunset in these beautiful places. So that was hard work, but a great assignment. Lincoln Els is a ranger from Yosemite, has climbed El Cap as many times as probably anybody, and started off as an assistant cameraman for us, but is accomplished enough that a number of shots in our film are from him. Alan Moore, who's been with us for many years, has this particular eye that you like to have applied to different landscapes and architecture as well, and he's been to a great number of the parks. And then there's Buddy Squires, who is an original member of Florentine Films and is our go-to guy. He's the best cinematographer, I think, in America, and the greatest person to go out on the road with, because it doesn't matter what time it is. It doesn't matter how tired you get. It doesn't matter how difficult the shot could be. Buddy's going to go get it. We shoot at dawn because that's the best time for light, and at dusk, which is the other best time for light. And if it is January and you're in Yellowstone, it's very cold, but the nice thing about it is that sunrise is like 8 a.m. and sunset is 4:30, so it's a short working day. If you're in Alaska and it's summertime, that means that the sunset, what passes for a sunset when it just dips a little bit below the horizon, is at 11 o'clock, and the sun rises at 2:30. So those can be long, murderous days. God is our lighting director, and sometimes he, with a capital H, is working on our side, and sometimes he's not. But it's that magical moment that you think nothing's going to happen, and then it does, that makes it all worthwhile.
I can remember flying after my 50th birthday, the day after my 50th birthday, all the way to Anchorage, Alaska, getting out at Anchorage, spending a day there, driving many, many hours to Denali, then driving in the 90-plus mile road, mostly dirt, to Wonder Lake, where we were going to spend a few days, and setting up the camera and looking at where I was told Denali, the high one, the mountain, ex-McKinley, was. I mean, I had set my frame like this, and then all of a sudden I realized there was brown way up there, and that I was literally looking at the most massive thing revealed on Earth. And we ended up with this amazing, amazing shot that had all to do with that sense of the unexpected, all to do with the sense of patience, all to do with the kind of family that we create to make this.
That's one of those big saucer eye moments. We saw McKinley, and it's one of the most astonishing shots, I think, that we have in our entire film.
You're looking for that thing that wakes you up, that makes you feel a little bit better about being alive. And all of that is accounted for in a look at a friend and a smile. You know, you look over at Dayton and you just nod like, wow, how lucky are we?
When we were in Alaska, the opportunity that we were going to do some aerial photography flying around Mount McKinley. I was a week away from my 40th birthday, and I decided that there was no way I could not do this. And we got up there, the doors off of the plane, and all this sort of weird sensory stuff's going on. And the wind is blowing, it's getting real cold, you can see your breath. And Buddy Squires, our cameraman, who was a crazy little daredevil, he's actually sitting out the thing. You know, we're at 13,000 feet. He's going to sit outside, put his legs out.
I find myself as a producer a lot of times saying, no, don't go there. Because I'm worried that, that he's going to go over the edge of a cliff, or he's going to slip and be, swept away by that river, or he's going to fall out of that helicopter. But he's always, always so ready to go and to bring his special eye to what we do. And in this particular film, about 68% of all of the shooting that was done was done by Buddy Squires.
And the jet stream, or whatever it is, up when we got out there, sucked him back so that his legs were sort of flapping along the side of the plane. But it was a pretty incredible thing. We were 8 miles away from the mountain and still looked like you could reach out and touch it.
There was something about going through the Grand Canyon to me, and I think for Ken and everybody else that was on the trip, is that it eventually overwhelms you. I think you surrender to it, and it was very different from many of our other shoots in which, you pull up in a hurry, try to get your tripods out, catch that first light, and move to another place so you can get something else. Well, you couldn't do that in the Grand Canyon. We're down there, a mile down. We have a campsite that we could try to shoot around at dawn time, and then we'd go down the river, and if the light was good, we'd shoot, and if it wasn't, then we'd just become people of the river. But we knew that we wouldn't be leaving for 2 weeks, and that was a very different experience for us because we had to surrender to the river, and it was a great gift, I think, of the project. The requirement of surrendering was the great gift to us of learning that about the Colorado and the Grand Canyon.
I'm not averse to getting out there in the wilderness, but I'd probably like to get home at the end of it and take a shower at the hotel or whatever. I haven't really done much camping, and here we were going to spend 11 days sleeping on sand or on rocks. Not many outhouses around, or the thing that we were using, this thing that Dayton calls the Thunder Bucket. You'd be sitting there and you'd see the raft coming down from another party, and you'd just sort of give them a wave as they went by, and they'd all say, "Hey, how's it going?"
One of the most memorable things about the Grand Canyon for me was our guide, who was a man named Brian Durker, who was kind of an eccentric, aging hippie of sorts, who'd been working in the Grand Canyon since he was my age, probably. He told us these stories as we'd be going through these rapids about coming through there as a younger man and being tossed out of his boat and forced to swim among the rapids. Hearing that right before we were going into these very same rapids was a little bit frightening.
I got a cool picture of Dayton. It looks like he's been thrown out of the boat. Nobody knows that it's really a ride that he's taking. And I used to call it, when he'd be getting on me out on the river, I called it wishful thinking.
One of the great joys for me in this project is that it sort of came out of my own family experience as a kid. And then the idea was prompted by the family trip that I took with my children and my wife 50 years later. And so I brought my family along with me to a lot of the places. They went to Hawaii.
We went out in the morning before the sunrise one day. All we had were headlamps, and we were walking out across these great plains of magma and couldn't really see anything that we were doing. But then finally we came around one bend and got to the shoreline, and we could see out across the water where a stream of lava was coming down and pouring into the ocean. It was also a breathtaking experience to see out here among all this blackness of the land in front of us, to see this light that was being made by nature instead of the headlamps that we were wearing.
They've been part of the making of the film, which arose out of sort of a family feeling of mine. particularly with Will, who started off this project, almost about my waist high. It's this little kid who we then brought with us to Alaska. And so he's holding a slate and he's, about waist high. And then over the course of time, I brought him along as a production assistant in the Grand Canyon. A couple years later, he's a little bit taller. And then as recently as one of our last shoots was at Kings Canyon National Park and Great Basin National Park. And by that point, he's lugging equipment. He's almost as tall as I am. When I look back on the film, the making of the film, to me, I'm looking back on my son growing up.
When I was younger, it was just a family vacation, the way I was looking at it. And I was able to appreciate the natural beauty of the surroundings when I was much younger. But as I've grown older, I think I've come to cherish the family aspect of it more. The national parks represent something that I've come to see with my dad and with my mom, my sister, and that years from now I'll probably come back with my family.
I have the best job in the country. The real reason why it's the best job is because of the people that I work with. They first of all make me look good. They're enormously talented cinematographers and producers, writers and editors. It's more than that, though. It's a family. It's people that I also spend my downtime with, and that ought to be an indication.
I think one of the great joys of my professional life, working with Ken, has been out in the field with him. I mean, I love being in the editing room and the hog wrestle, as I would call it, of deciding what's going to end up in the film, what's not. I love that collaborative effort. But one of the great joys of my life and my friendship with him has been taking him out to these places. Ken's enthusiasm is like a jolt of energy transferring to you. His eyes get really big when he sees something cool and wants to shoot it. And it's impossible not to be reinfected by that. It might be the 20th time you've been there, but when you're there with him, you really feel the excitement of the place. Hiking back from an upper valley one morning with Ken in Yosemite Valley. There was just something about hiking out with your best friend. Was a wonderful thing. We didn't have to worry about the light. We didn't have to worry about the shots. And we were talking as we're going down a trail, that trail had been built by CCC workers. And what a lasting thing that is, that these guys who were down on their luck, needed a job, had built this trail that 70 years later was still useful and still beautiful. And, as you're walking through, you sort of hope that what you do might be half as useful and half as beautiful.
Having the privilege of working with Dayton for the last, nearly 20 years, of seeing his day-to-day passion, a kind of ferocious passion for these projects and for the meaning behind them, to see this tough man almost always come to tears because of the meaning of the thing that he's working on, is one of the greatest gifts that I know. These films are made in the editing room, but the real hunter-gathering, the collecting of these spare parts for which we need to edit, takes place on the road, and it's cold, it's hot, it's uncomfortable, you're carrying heavy equipment for long distances, and you're exhilarated. And part of the exhilaration is that you get to look at a friend and realize that you're sharing it together with him.
I grew up in a town of about 800 people. In some of these parks, I would be waiting for the sun to rise and looking out over an expanse of land that was twice, 3 times as big as the area that I spent my entire life in. One of my favorite memories is just simply in Grand Teton National Park, walking by myself along the Snake River, and for all I knew, it could have been 1800 instead of 2003, and about 40 elk come out of the trees and just cross the river in front of me. I'll never forget having my car surrounded by buffalo, being alone on a sunrise at Mesa Verde, or watching Old Faithful go off in the early morning and just being overwhelmed by the beauty of it. Taking a knee-knocking trip up to Angel's Landing in Zion National Park, where you're literally looking down 1,500 feet on either side of you while you're holding onto a chain. You know, there's a reason that Americans think that they are living in the greatest place in the world, because we have some unbelievable landscapes out there. Whether it's the Everglades or the granite domes and foliage of Acadia National Park in Maine, the alien landscapes out in the Southwest, or the huge canyon that is one of the most unbelievable things. There's a reason that people thought that this place was blessed, and I hope that that's the one thing that you really come away with, because that's what I got from it.
In order to understand who I am, I have to go out into nature. And it's there in your insignificance in nature, strangely enough, that you find your significance as a human being. It's there that you forge intimate relations with other people. It's there, as you look at geological time passing, that your own puny existence actually takes on meaning and has some relevance. What am I doing? I've got to get going. And it's wonderful to be in a national park and to feel all of that intensity of experience, of being, and I think of history, because this is not just an individual story of me, of us, but of the United States, a kind of collective thing.